Chapter 71, The Hall of Magic. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. The sky turned dusky as the sun started to disappear into the horizon. Shi Mu walked out of the blacksmith's shop with lively footsteps. He had nearly 10,000 silvers in his pocket. He had earned this money with an easy job of hammering iron. Therefore, he was quite satisfied. He wasn't sure if he'd bump into such an opportunity again. He took a turn from the foot of the mountain. A building covered with spires of grey tiles appeared in his line of sight. It was located in a medium-sized area. There were numerous buildings in the mountain valley. However, Shi Mu hadn't paid any attention to his surroundings when he was heading to the blacksmith's shop. Now, he saw a grey building as he strolled his vision around. A huge board hung above the front gate of the building. It was inscribed with the Hall of Magic. Several disciples were gathered in front of the building's gate. These disciples were looking towards the hall in an inquisitive manner. However, nobody took a step to enter the hall. This sparked off Shi Mu's curiosity. He stopped. Suddenly, a gust of wind rolled out of the hall. The vision of the surrounding people got blurred due to the swirling sand that surged with the wind. The crowd was pushed back a few steps. Ah! A shadow flashed out with a loud scream. It was wrapped in the wind. It issued dull thumping sounds as it fell on the ground outside the main hall. The strong wind didn't have any effect on Shi Mu since he was standing at a distance from the front gate. Therefore, he could see everything clearly. He realized that the shadow was that of a youngster with dark skin. He seemed to be as old as Shi Mu. His body had been tightly tied up by green vine canes. It seemed as if he was wrapped in a steamed rice dumpling, only his head and calves were visible. The dark-skinned youngster had hit the ground heavily since he was forcibly flung out of the hall. He groaned in pain as he rolled on the ground. His face was contorted in agony. He couldn't even get up from the ground. "Brother Yu!" Two youngsters rushed out of the crowd. They seemed to be acquaintances of the swarthy youth. However, they stopped and looked towards the gate of the hall. They were aghast. For a while, they didn't dare to put out their hands to help the youngster who lay on the ground. "How dare you come here to take the test with such talent? You have wasted my precious time." A hoarse voice could be heard from inside the hall. The tone revealed an impatient disposition. The dark-skinned youth struggled as he lay on the ground. He finally got rid of the vines with the help of his two friends. Then, he looked towards the door of the hall with a flushed face. "It's impossible. I asked a specialist to check me when I lived with my family. On the basis of what he discovered, I definitely possess a magician skill. I've even started to learn the foundation techniques." The youngster looked embarrassed. He argued since he couldn't accept those words. "Humph! Don't compare other magicians with this sex. Everyone knows that the resources needed to train a magician are almost 10 times more than the resources needed to cultivate a warrior of the same level. Did you think that this sect would spend huge resources to train people like you? People who have only 1 element's 1 degree induction force? One must at least be able to make the induction water shine over 3 degrees in order to become an official magician practitioner." The voice sounded even more impatient. The dark-skinned youngster felt humiliated by these words. Therefore, he departed with a dejected face. Those who want to test their magic skills must come inside with a clear mind. If someone comes in carelessly, then I won't just throw you out, I won't give such a simple punishment again. This old man doesn't have a lot of free time, the harsh voice resounded. This was followed by absolute silence in the hall. The surrounding people looked at each other in dismay as they heard these words. Then, they started to discuss in low voices. Shi Mu understood the entire matter as he listened to the people's discussion. The Hall of Magic was a place that filtered true magicians from the huge aspiring crowd. However, they didn't examine one's talent for free. One needed to pay 3,000 silvers to enter the hall. In addition, the examiner of this place had a strange temperament. The money paid as the entrance fee would get wasted if a person's test result didn't turn out to be satisfactory. Moreover, that person would be humiliated by the examiner. The discussion continued for a while. Some people were eager to try. However, the swarthy youngster's experience had left them discouraged. Therefore, nobody dared to step into the hall. Shi Mu also hesitated for a moment. But, the magician's status made his eyes twinkle with excitement. Moreover, he remembered that there were various kinds of missions for magicians with excellent pay in the Hall of Wealth. Therefore, he strengthened his heart and entered the hall with pockets that bulged with silver notes. The surrounding people were taken aback as they saw this. They began to whisper and inquire about Shi Mu's status. Shi Mu seemed to be indifferent to the situation and people's whispers. He entered the hall in a steady manner. He crossed the front door of the hall, and came across a corridor which was several feet wide. It led to a serene main hall. The main hall was spacious. However, it didn't have many decorations. A vast table made of red sandalwood had been laid out on the left. A grey-robed old man sat behind the table. He seemed to be absorbed in reading a yellow scroll that he held in his hand. A round-shaped stone platform had been placed on the right side of the hall. The platform was 1 feet above the ground. It was 10 feet in dimensions. Strange magical characters had been painted on its surface. Multicolored crystal columns had been arranged around that platform. Each of these columns was as thick as a lip. The colors of these columns were different from each other. In addition, each of them was carved with 9 check patterns. These checks divided the standard from bottom to top into 9 grades. They looked extremely enigmatic. Shi Mu was astonished as he saw the platform and the crystal columns. The old man raised his head as he heard Shi Mu's footsteps. The old man's stature was petite, he had grizzled hair and triangular eyes. His mouth was pointed, and his cheeks were like that of a monkey. He had an unkind appearance. The old man turned his triangular eyes towards Shi Mu as he put down the scroll. However, he didn't rise from his seat. For detection, write down your name and status on the paper, the grey-robed man grunted and said with a desolate expression. My name is Shi Mu. I'm a new disciple. I joined this sect 2 months back. Shi Mu cupped one hand in the other across his chest as he respectfully spoke up. The grey-robed man sized him up. He sneered, didn't you see what happened a moment ago? You still have the courage to test your magic skills? You harbor wishful thinking, don't you? Shi Mu's complexion changed as he heard these words. However, he remained silent. I've seen a lot of guys like you, who can't practice properly, but whose minds are full of impractical thoughts. The Hall of Magic is a place to test the magic skills of the disciples. But, this old man is unwilling to test worthless fellows like you. You might as well save your money and leave. The old man glared at Shi Mu as he spoke in a cold voice. Senior, this disciple has walked in mentally prepared. Here are 3,000 in silver notes. Please spare a little time to test my skills. Shi Mu took out 3 silver notes from his pocket. Then, he respectfully placed them on the red sandalwood table. The old man was astonished. He narrowed his eyes to observe Shi Mu more closely. However, Shi Mu stood calmly with a firm expression on his face. Humph, you're quite courageous, a strange look crossed the old man's eyes. He gave a snort as he stood up from his chair. Come over here, stand on this stone platform. The old man walked up to the platform and took out a jade ruler from his bosom. The ruler was engraved with multicolored magical characters. These characters resembled the patterns carved on the stone platform. Shi Mu was delighted. He hastily walked and stood on the platform. The old man muttered something. Suddenly, a burst of green light emerged from his body and streamed into the jade ruler. The characters engraved on the ruler lit up as soon as the green light submerged into its body. A colorful ray of light exuded from the ruler as the old man waved his arm. Then, the ray of light got integrated with the stone platform. Buzz! Suddenly, the patterns carved on the round platform shone up. They started to radiate various kinds of assorted rays. Then, a whirring sound reverberated in the hall. Shi Mu's expressions changed as he saw this. Suddenly, his body was shrouded by the assorted rays exuded by the platform. A gust of warm air rushed forth from beneath his feet and streamed into his body. It wandered within his body at a lightning speed for a while. Then, it flowed back into the stone platform. The bright patterns on the platform eventually became dim. However, a few changes were seen in the surrounding crystal columns. Suddenly, a blue, a red and a black crystal column lit up in unison. In the three crystal columns, the first position from the bottom shone up brightly before the rays started to rise upwards. The blue crystal column shone with one standard check pattern, the red column with two. However, the black column shone brightly with 5 check patterns. The grey-robed old man was stunned as he saw this. Chapter 72, Spatial Element Induction Force. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. The old man's complexion had returned to its normal serene state by the time Shi Mu stepped down from the stone platform. May I ask the senior whether I've passed the test or not? I can see that my element induction ability has crossed the 3rd degree. Shi Mu had noticed the strange look that had appeared in the old man's eyes. Therefore, he asked in a probing tone. Ahm. It should be, you may be right. The old man's triangular eyes glanced at Shi Mu to size him up. His complexion had become a little queer. Senior, is there something inappropriate about this disciple's body? Shi Mu was exhilarated as he heard the old man's answer. However, he started to feel restless as he saw the weird look on his face. There's a difference between a magician and a warrior. The strong and weak element induction force of a person determines his or her potential. Several big sects, including ours, have reached a consensus the magicians whose element induction force falls below 3 degrees would have little possibility of attaining the star grade level. Their efforts would be futile even if they consume huge resources. So, several big sects have set the benchmark of over 3 degrees element induction force to determine whether one has the potential to get trained or not. Your element induction force is over 5 degrees. This means that you have a slight chance of stepping into the moon grade level. The old man retracted his vision. Then, he explained after pondering for a moment. Shi Mu became excited as he turned his head to look at the black column. The old man shook his head as he saw his expression. He seemed to feel a little sorry for him. Then, he clicked his tongue and continued, you would have become an invaluable treasure for our sect if you had stimulated any other crystal column up to 5 checks, apart from the black and white columns. Unfortunately, you've stimulated the element induction force which represents the illusionary space. It's exceedingly rare. Moreover, no one has ever stimulated this element force in the history of our sect. So, we barely have any practice arts for this element. In addition, it's mostly related to the arts of formula magicians and soul magicians. So, you won't get too far, no matter what effort you exert to practice these 2 magic arts. The possibility of you climbing up to the higher level is extremely low. Shi Mu was disappointed as he heard this. However, he became calm and confident after he gave it a second thought. Shi Mu hadn't had any hope of possessing a magic skill before he had set his foot in the hall. Therefore, even to become a practitioner-level magician was an incredible achievement for him. Moreover, he remembered that several tasks available in the Hall of Wealth could only be taken up by a practitioner magician. He became a little impatient. Senior, do I have the ability to become an official practitioner magician? Shi Mu looked at the blue and red columns which were below 3 checks. Absolutely, the old man answered without any hesitation. So, can I choose to become a magician? His eyes sparkled with a trace of excitement. Then, he asked the question that concerned him the most. Considering your innate talent, would you have any other choice apart from becoming a formula or a soul magician? The old man's triangular eyes rolled and revealed a puzzled look. The old man's words sounded melodious to Shi Mu even though they were unkind. He became excited as he realized that he wouldn't have to worry about the practice resources if he became a magician. This isn't the place where magic arts practitioners are really registered. Come with me. Shi Mu was overwhelmed with exhilaration as he heard that he could become a magician. He started to gaze at the old man in a crazy manner. However, the old man didn't pay any attention to him. Instead, he walked further into the room. Then, he gently touched an ordinary-looking wall, twice. A doorway as tall as a man emerged out of thin air with a light sound. Shi Mu followed him. He was amazed as he saw the intricacy of the hidden door's mechanism. The passageway after crossing the secret door wasn't long. Therefore, they soon arrived in a secret room. The secret room wasn't spacious, it was minimally decorated. However, the center of the floor was carved with a huge circular design with innumerable silver patterns and unknown mysterious writing. They seemed to be some sort of a chart of binding rules. What's holding you up? Come on in. The old man stood at the center of the circular design. He gazed at Shi Mu, who seemed to be observing the room. Then, he spoke in an impatient manner. Shi Mu didn't dare to speak anything in rebuttal. He stepped inside the circular pattern. The old man took out a yellow paper charm and flicked his wrist. Suddenly, the paper charm caught fire. Then, it left the old man's hand and turned into a yellow ball of light. It seemed to be wrapped in a strange energy. The light ball moved to the floor and submerged into the circular design. Buzz, a buzzing sound was heard. The silver patterns and characters that were carved on the floor seemed to have come alive. They exuded a faint trace of white light as they swirled. Shi Mu and the old man disappeared from the room as the white light rolled up in the air. Shi Mu felt dizzy. Then, he found himself standing in an underground hall. The hall was made of some strange green stone that he had never seen before. The floor space was small. However, it looked quite spacious since the hall was empty. The ceiling was decorated with several luminous fist-sized pearls. These pearls illuminated the entire hall. The hall seemed as bright as day. A towering green jade wall stood at the center of the hall. A huge bronze incense burner was laid out in front of it. The shape of the incense burner resembled a beast's head. A purple candle as thick as a baby's arm was inserted in the burner. There were grey and black remnant marks on the candle. This meant that it had been used before. Shi Mu's eyes fell on the huge jade wall as he surveyed the room. The wall was filled with nearly 100 different marks. These marks had been printed from top to bottom. The top 2 marks were star-shaped, and light red in color. The second row had 8 green marks which were shaped like cloud clusters. There were more than 100 white luminous marks below them. These marks were glowing, they seemed exceptionally mysterious. These mystical marks reminded Shi Mu of what Huo Mao had told him in the Fragrant River Tavern. According to him, the Black Demon sect had 10 official magicians. And, around 100 unofficial magicians at the practitioner level. This information forced him to make a guess. You must keep your mouth shut. And don't look around. The grey-robed old man spoke in a stern voice. Shi Mu felt a chill in his heart. He lowered his eyes and stood beside the old man. The old man was satisfied as the atmosphere of the hall had become dignified. He nodded and walked up to the burner. Then, he waved his hand above it. Zi! A bright light sparked on top of the candle. Suddenly, the candle lit up, a wisp of blue smoke could be seen curling up. The old man respectfully bowed to the smoke. A star-shaped mark flashed on the top left side of the green jade wall. The mark exuded a red light beam. The light beam whirled above the incense burner before it started to condense. Then, it turned into a fuzzy and virtual shadow. Shi Mu stared at the vague silhouette with rapt attention. It turned out to be a middle-aged Confucian scholar with a long black beard. Master Xie, the old man respectfully bowed in front of the fuzzy silhouette. Notes: any magician is an unrecognized magician if they can't clear the 3rd degree in the assessment test. They may still possess the innate talent to practice magic arts. But they aren't worthy of the sex recognition. A magician is considered an official magician of the practitioner level if they can cross 3 degrees in the assessment test conducted by the sect. Such a person is officially recognized for their talent by the sect, but is still considered an unofficial magician since they are only practitioner-level magicians, not full-fledged magicians. A magician that reaches the spirit grade is considered an official magician by the sect. They are no longer considered as practitioner level/unofficial. Chapter 73, A Magician Practitioner. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Did you find a new potential disciple with magic skills in our sect? Master Xie shot a glance at Shi Mu who stood behind the grey-robed man. Then, he asked lightly. The grey-robed man shared the details of Shi Mu's element induction force. He also told Master Xie that Shi Mu had attained 5 degrees in spatial sensing, 2 degrees in fire sensing and 1 degree in water sensing. Oh, he hit 5 degrees in spatial sensing. The Confucian scholar's eyes flashed and a surprised look appeared on his face. He sized Shi Mu up a few times. Shi Mu felt a chill in his heart, he lowered his head and didn't dare to look up. The long-bearded man's gaze looked cold. However, it possessed an unusual force that could see through one's body. "What's your name?" the long-bearded man asked after a while. "Master Xie, this disciple's name is Shi Mu," Shi Mu replied respectfully. "Induction force at 5 degrees is quite rare. It's a pity that you've induced 5 degrees in spatial sensing. You must know that there has never been a spatial magician in our sect, since its inception. So, it may be a little difficult to teach you. In fact, I'm feeling a little embarrassed," the long-bearded man nodded as he said, there was a hesitant look on his face. Shi Mu started to feel anxious as he heard this. "Well, I give you 2 choices. The first one is based on your status as an ordinary magician practitioner. You may receive 1 magic resource as per our sect's regulation. But, no preferential treatment will be given to you," the long-bearded man said after he had pondered for a while. Shi Mu's complexion changed as he heard the first option. However, he remained silent and waited for the long-bearded man to tell him the second option. "The second option is that you will have to sign a magic contract, pledging to never leave the Black Demon sect. Only then, I the star-grade magician will personally guide you in learning magic. Moreover, our sect will provide you more resources than any ordinary magician practitioner. If your perception is good enough, then I can even consider making you my successor in the future," the long-bearded man continued. The grey-robed man was astonished as he heard this. He turned and looked at Shi Mu. "If choosing the second option confines me to this sect, then I would rather choose the first one." Shi Mu pondered for a while. Then, he spoke without any hesitation. The long-bearded man's second offer seemed quite tempting. However, Shi Mu was unwilling to consider it because of its natural flaw to sacrifice his freedom and get confined to the Black Demon sect for the rest of his life. What was the use of attaining formidable power if he couldn't even enjoy his freedom? The long-bearded man's eyes moved, they were expressionless. He nodded and raised his hand in the direction of the stone wall. A cloud of white smoke emerged from the wall and condensed into a palm-sized circular jade ornament. Then, it flew and stopped in front of Shi Mu. "Put a drop of your blood on it," the long-bearded man said. Shi Mu hesitated for a moment. But then, he cut his finger and dripped a drop of his blood on the jade ornament. The long-bearded man pointed his finger, a beam of light shot out of it. The light beam integrated into the jade ornament. Suddenly, the jade ornament radiated a white light, a faint trace of red light was flowing within it. Then, some obscure characters emerged and started to swirl within the light. A beam of red light projected from the center of the jade ornament, the red light then fused with the green stone wall. Then, a new light dot appeared among the 100 light dots twinkling on the bottom of the wall. The white light in the jade ornament faded as a luminous dot appeared on its surface. This dot started to tinkle correspondingly with the new light dot that had emerged on the wall. Then, 2 small red words emerged on the surface of the jade ornament, it was Shi Mu's name. There was a red pattern on the other side of the jade ornament. This pattern comprised of several magic characters, it looked like a lotus flower in full bloom. This is your identity card as a magician in our sect. Don't lose it at any cost. You'll be recognized as a magician practitioner of this sect from now on. The long-bearded man retracted his finger. Then, he looked at Shi Mu and spoke. Yes, this disciple will always keep this in mind. Shi Mu held the jade ornament with both hands and replied respectfully. The long-bearded man nodded. Then, he turned his gaze towards the grey-robed man. Well, I'll leave the rest to you. His eyes flickered as he said, he seemed to be tired. Then, his body started to glitter with a red light. After that, he transformed into a red light and submerged in the star-shaped mark on the green stone wall before disappearing. The grey-robed man hurriedly replied to him. He straightened his body once the middle-aged man had disappeared. Follow me, the grey-robed old man looked at Shi Mu and said. Then, he walked towards the corner of the hall. Shi Mu ceased to examine the round jade ornament as he heard this. Then, he hurriedly followed the old man. The old man stood beside a black wall in the hall. He whipped the wall twice with his hand. Then, he gestured to unleash a beam of white light. Subsequently, a beam of light fell on the wall. A faint black light emerged from the wall. After that, a stone door as tall as a person appeared in the black wall with a clicking sound. A faint green light also appeared in the doorway, it condensed and formed a green light shield and blocked their way. Use your jade ornament, it's a key to this door. Come inside with me. But, let me warn you, you won't be able to touch anything without my permission once you enter the door. If you dare to do anything recklessly, the consequences would be severe, the old man sneered. Then, his body flashed and disappeared into the green light. Shi Mu's complexion changed. He glanced at the jade ornament and placed it against the green light shield. Suddenly, the green light shield flickered and split up. Shi Mu hurriedly walked through the door. He saw a dark path as he crossed the entrance. The grey-robed old man was already there. He beckoned Shi Mu to walk further. They walked for half a quarter of an hour. After that, an ordinary-sized stone chamber appeared in front of them. The chamber looked ordinary, it was empty except for 7 or 8 wooden shelves which were placed in the center. Each shelf was divided into several shelves. The top rows of these shelves contained jade slips of different colors and sizes. Each jade slip was shrouded in a small light shield which radiated multicolored rays of light. We store all the magic arts of our sect in this place. Now, you've become an official magician practitioner. So, you can choose one art for free as per the rules of our sect, the grey-robed man said. Shi Mu was pleasantly surprised as he heard this. He nodded a few times. Then, he shifted his gaze towards the shelves. However, he didn't dare to rush as he remembered the old man's warning. Master, may this disciple ask your honorable name? Shi Mu asked the old man as a thought came to his mind. This old man is called Sunan, you can call me Master Sun, the grey-robed old man answered in a soft voice. Surprisingly, the old man's tone sounded friendlier than before. Perhaps it was because Shi Mu had become an official magician practitioner of the sect. Chapter 74, The Art of Accumulating Spirit Power. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. I can't understand one thing, I'm thinking of asking Master Sun for his advice. Shi Mu hesitated for a moment. Then, he clasped his hands across his chest and spoke. If you have a question, then ask quickly, the old man rolled his eyes as he said. I saw a number of magic arts in the general library. In fact, the number of magic arts stored in the general library was far higher than what we have here. I wonder what might be the difference between them, Shi Mu asked. He didn't seem to care about the strange disposition of the old man Sunan. The old man glanced at Shi Mu and snorted, there's nothing strange about it. The number of magic arts stored in the general library is huge. But, they are ordinary arts that can be found in almost very big sect. Even the disciples who don't possess any element induction force can get those arts in exchange for flaming demon tokens. However, the magic arts that you can see in the Hall of Magic are quite different. These arts are fewer in quantity, but they are the essence of our Black Demon sect. Moreover, these arts can be accessed by only those disciples whose names have been imprinted on the stones as magician practitioners. Shi Mu nodded as he heard these words. Well, enough of the superfluous words. Now, I'll relieve the ban on this place for a while. Hurry up, and choose the art that fits you, the grey-robed man spoke in an impatient tone. Then, he read an incantation and wielded one of his hands. Suddenly, a ray of light flashed in the stone chamber, the light shield wrapped around the jade slips twinkled at the same time. Then, the radiance started to dissipate. The old man retired to a corner in the room, and crossed his hands behind his back. Then, he looked up at the ceiling. It seemed as if he had entered a deep state of thought. Shi Mu started to breathe quickly as he looked at the pieces of the jade slips. It was beneficial for a disciple to be able to learn an art for free before the martial arts competition. The ordinary arts stored in the general library could be obtained in exchange of not less than 6 flaming demon tokens. But, according to Old Man Sun, the value of these arts was far inferior to the magic arts stored in the Hall of Magic. 1. Shi Mu sucked in a deep breath to regain his composure. Then, he walked to the nearest wooden shelf. He browsed through more than 200 magic arts in half an hour. He wrinkled his brows once he had finished examining all the arts. It turned out that most of these arts were auxiliary arts that were used by the magicians to support their strength. He held a jade slip in his hand. It bore the name The Art of True Fire and Magic. The name of this art sounded quite good. However, it only boosted the effect of the pills and medicines used to refine the fire element. It could enhance the effectiveness of the medicines by several folds. A few slips contained the methods to simplify alchemy, i.e. methods to make rare pills and cultivate several kinds of spirit plants. A few slips comprised of the details of making a paper charm or a magic formula. Shi Mu also came across a few jade slips that described ways to make various kinds of magic tools. There were limited arts for the magicians. He went through all these arts carefully. He found 10 arts that were worth paying attention to. However, most of these arts were related to 5 elemental magicians. Only 2 arts had something to do with the training of the wind, thunder, and ice magicians. One of these arts was designed for charm and formula adept. It was called the art of accumulating spirit power. This art didn't need any special kind of element. Therefore, any magician could choose to practice it. Shi Mu was dumbfounded. He couldn't hide the dejected look in his eyes. Master Sun, the collection of magic arts stored in this hall can't be considered as small. But, why are there only a few practicing arts? The rest of the arts are auxiliary arts, they can only be used for power enhancement. Shi Mu rummaged through the shelves for a while. Then, he couldn't help but ask Sunan. This isn't a big deal. The magic arts are rarer than warriors' cultivation arts or any other pill refining art. These arts can lead you to the star grade level. The practice arts in the general library are fragmentary and low level, they are meant for practitioner level magicians. The grey-robed man glanced at Shi Mu as he replied in an expressionless tone. If that's the case, then this disciple will choose the art named Art of Accumulating Spirit Power. Shi Mu picked up a grey jade slip from the shelf and said reluctantly. Hehe, don't underestimate this art. It's true that its strength and practice speed are inferior to other practice arts. But, it's one of the 3 big magic arts in our sect. You can reach the moon grade level by practicing this art. Every magician who couldn't find any other appropriate art, mostly chose this one. No one has ever regretted it. The old man looked at Shi Mu and said with a smiling face. Shi Mu's eyes gleamed with excitement as he heard this. But, he was swayed by his personal gains and losses when he thought of its slow practice speed. This art has an advantage over other arts even though its practice speed is slow. It's far superior to other practice arts since it commands purer and more stable magic power. I've rarely heard of any magician who met with an accident or suffered serious side effect while practicing this art. Therefore, it's suitable for charm and spirit grade magicians, as these magicians require the stability of magic force. By the way, you have a special condition: your spatial induction force is quite strong. So, you might be unable to practice any other art. As per your ability, this is the most suitable art for you. The old man narrowed his eyes, as if he had seen through Shi Mu's worries. Then, he explained with a smile. Shi Mu was speechless. Sun An was right. However, wasn't it true that Shi Mu would be left with only water and fire element arts with 2 degrees or less of induction force if he didn't choose this art? Shi Mu let out a deep sigh. Then, he handed over the grey slip of the art of accumulating spirit power to Sun An. Master Sun is right, I'll choose this art. The old man received the grey slip with one hand. He took out a white jade slip from his bosom with his other hand. Then, he stuck both slips against his forehead, and started to mumble something. The old man passed the slip to Shi Mu once he had finished recording its contents. Then, he said in an expressionless tone, "Here are the details of the first 5 layers of this art. They are sufficient to take you to the spirit grade adept. You'll have to go to the Holy Spirit Pavilion after you've left this place. There, you can claim the resources of a magician practitioner on the basis of the status of your jade ornament." Shi Mu couldn't help but gawk as he heard this. He started to think, why are there just 5 layers in this art? However, after thinking for a while, he thought that it was fine. After all, he was just a magician practitioner. So, how could he be able to practice all the layers up till the moon grade? It seems that I'll have to spend numerous flaming demon tokens to obtain the latter half of this art. Shi Mu received the copy of the 5 layers while being engaged in these thoughts. The grey-robed man gave some advice to Shi Mu, in a way similar to that of Meng Gu from the Blood Pavilion. Then, he asked Shi Mu to leave without any hesitation. Shi Mu bowed and left the Hall of Magic with a heavy heart. Notes: Hall of Magic can be alternately translated as Hall of Spirit. We're intentionally using Hall of Magic since it will easier to relate to the hall as a place that caters to magicians. Chapter 75, Spirit Power. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. There was no one outside the Hall of Magic as Shi Mu stepped out of its entrance. The huge crowd of disciples which was gathered outside the hall seemed to have diverged. His eyes flashed as he looked around. Then, he started to walk. He arrived in front of a building after quarter of an hour. The building seemed to be made of some kind of yellow wood. A huge horizontal board hung over its gate. It was inscribed with 3 words: Holy Spirit Pavilion. The pavilion's door was wide open. No one could be seen outside the building. There was complete silence. However, someone's faint voice could be heard from inside. Shi Mu raised his head. He got excited as he saw the board inscribed with Holy Spirit Pavilion. He took a deep breath, and stepped into the hall. Suddenly, a person's silhouette flashed past the gate. It was another person who had walked out of the hall. Shi Mu was relatively inattentive. Therefore, he was about to bump into that person. However, he quickly controlled his feet and stopped. Shi Mu raised his head to see a thin and tall youngster standing in front of him. He was a little taller than Shi Mu. He had a skinny stature with sunken cheeks and long limbs, like a bamboo pole. The youngster's physical attributes weren't eye-catching. However, his persona exhibited a trace of astonishing strength. This couldn't be overlooked. Shi Mu's countenance changed as he noticed the uniform of the youngster. He seemed to be a primary disciple. However, he seemed to be an older primary disciple with regard to his age. Moreover, this person might have been a magician since he had showed up at this place. Shi Mu's body moved aside and made way for him to pass, even though his mind was occupied with these thoughts. The scrawny youngster looked at Shi Mu in an indifferent manner. Then, he walked away with an expressionless face. Shi Mu looked at the departing figure of the youngster for a while. Then, he entered the Holy Spirit Pavilion. The inside of the pavilion was simply decorated. A wooden table had been placed in the front, a 30-year-old man stood beside it with an expressionless face. A new magician practitioner, the simple and inarticulate man glanced at Shi Mu and said in a soft tone. "Yes, Senior. I'm here to receive the resources as a newly registered magician," Shi Mu said in a courteous manner. Then, he took out the white jade ornament from his pocket, and handed it over to the middle-aged man. The man received the jade ornament. Then, he moved his hand, and took out a green ruler. After that, he gently whipped the ruler on the jade ornament. Suddenly, the jade ornament exuded a beam of white light. This light flew and submerged into the ruler. The green ruler dazzled as Shi Mu's name emerged on its surface. The middle-aged man nodded as he saw this. Then, he returned the jade ornament to Shi Mu. Shi Mu arrived at his room after half an hour. His face was lit up with excitement as he closed the door. Then, he took out a small green packet from his shirt and untied it. He opened it to find 12 flaming demon tokens, a green bottle, and 3 crystals, 1 blue and 2 red. Shi Mu looked at the 12 flaming demon tokens. Now, he was convinced that the resources provided to magicians were far more than the ones provided to martial warriors. These extra flaming demon tokens had the power to stir up the jealousy of several ordinary disciples. However, such a preferential treatment could only be enjoyed by those magicians whose names had been carved on the jade wall in the Hall of Magic. Surprisingly, only around 100 names had been carved so far. Shi Mu picked up the green bottle. A delicate fragrance entered his nose as he opened its lid. There were 3 thumb-sized green pills inside the bottle. A joyful smile spread across Shi Mu's face. He had seen this pill before. It was the spirit strengthening pill. It could replenish a magician's spirit power in a fast manner. Magicians used this pill to maintain their life. Therefore, it was extremely precious. The value of these pills would be more than 100,000 silvers. Shi Mu put away the bottle carefully. Then, he picked up one of the crystals. The crystal was about the size of a pigeon egg. A gentle red light was emanating out of its surface. Also, the presence of a vaguely visible airflow could be felt moving inside it. This crystal was a spirit stone that commanded a high value in the world of magicians. The air current flowing inside it was its refined magic power. This crystal was bright red in color, similar to that of a blazing fire. This meant that it was the spirit stone of fire, one of the 5 elemental stones. The value of these spirit stones was at par with the spirit strengthening pill, even though they were the lowest level spirit stones. Shi Mu had seen a spirit stone for the first time. Therefore, he continued to play with them for a long time before he put them away. Every practitioner would receive these things once a year. However, they were an enormous wealth for a disciple like Shi Mu. Shi Mu tried to control his excitement since he was aware that these things were external resources. He knew that he must rely on his own painful sessions if he were to forge his strength in an effective manner. He took out the jade slip of the art of accumulating spirit power from his bosom, and placed it against his forehead. Suddenly, various small characters from the jade slip began to appear in his mind. He had finished scooping the entire contents of the jade slip within quarter of an hour. He noticed that the methods to practice the art of accumulating spirit power, the art of breeding heavenly elephants and the art of breeding the strong evil ape were widely divergent. The art of accumulating spirit power involved absorbing the spiritual energy into one's body from one's surroundings. However, it also played a crucial role in transforming the absorbed spiritual energy into the purest form of spirit power. It was more refined than real qi. Moreover, it needed to unify the strength of spirit power at the time of practice. It also required the induction force of the corresponding element. In addition, it was 10 times more difficult to practice than any other Houtian art. According to the jade slip, each stage of the art of accumulating spirit power would double the spirit power of the practitioner. One could try to break through to the spirit grade once one had accomplished all the 5 stages. However, even the most talented magicians needed a couple of years to master the first stage. Therefore, the ordinary magicians would take 3 to 4 years to master it, depending upon their intelligence. It would take twice as much time to practice the second stage. This rate of time consumption would continue with each of the following stages, with an advanced stage taking twice as much time needed to practice the previous one. Shi Mu sucked in a cold breath. He quickly calculated and realized that even the most talented magician would take at least 30 years to master this art, even if he immersed himself in its practice. A bitter smile spread across his face. He finally understood the reason behind the limited number of spirit-grade magicians in the sect. He also realized why even the practitioner-level magicians were treated so highly in the sect. The art of accumulating spirit power was difficult to practice. However, one could acquire skills named Qi bursting and Qi binding at its 4th and 5th stage respectively. Shi Mu withdrew the jade slip from his forehead after an hour. His complexion looked gloomy. The difficulty level to practice this art had surpassed his expectations, even though the prospect of becoming a magician seemed to be bright. However, he couldn't back down after reaching this far. He put away the jade slip, and closed his eyes. Then, he controlled his breath, and adjusted his mind to reach its optimal state. He had memorized all the 5 stages of the art of accumulating spirit power. He was convinced that he hadn't forgotten anything as he carefully recalled every minor detail. Then, he followed the first stage of the art, and started to revolve his spirit power. His mind got immersed in a mysterious state with the passage of time. His spirit power started to expand outside his body. The surrounding scene seemed to be reflecting in his mind even though his eyes were closed. Shi Mu felt as if everything around him had become empty and bright. Then, numerous small light dots started to emerge from this vacant state of nothingness, and got integrated into his body. The luminous light dots revolved and turned into a faint trace of refined spirit power. This spirit power started to flow through his veins and vessels. This refined energy was so tiny that it didn't conflict with the real qi within his body. Shi Mu was ecstatic since he had learnt the method to practice this art. Some time passed. Shi Mu continued to sit in meditation for half a day. The spirit power accumulated within his body had gathered in his danshan. Then, it had transformed into a wisp of a thick stream of spirit power, and had started to revolve within his body. Suddenly, a mutation broke out as the wisp of spirit power reached his head. Chapter 76, Dreamland Mutation. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Shi Mu had a strange feeling as the spirit power reached his head. Suddenly, the crystal capsule vibrated and exuded an attractive force. Shi Mu had condensed this crystal capsule while practicing the moon-swallowing art. That force peeled off a wisp of spirit power from its stream. Then, it reached his mind and got integrated with the crystal capsule. Bang! A loud explosion resounded. The crystal capsule vibrated again, and broke into pieces. Then, it took the shape of a tiny and exquisite white crescent moon. The silver light glowing on the surface of the crescent moon began to expand. Suddenly, a portion of the crescent moon dissipated with a loud rumbling sound, and transformed into a wisp of refined spirit power. This refined spirit power converged with the thick stream of spirit power, and started to flow in Shi Mu's meridians. Shi Mu's face became pale due to this sensation. He felt as if his meridians were swelling, as if they had been filled with a great force. This left him with a sense of extreme discomfort. The wisp of spirit power which was flowing with the crescent moon continued to dissipate into the refined spirit power. Soon, the intensity of the circulating stream increased, and it formed a mighty current of spirit power. Shi Mu was alarmed. He hurriedly operated the art of accumulating spirit power. He repressed his body's discomfort in an attempt to direct this current into the right channel. Fortunately, the mighty current of spirit power was turbulent, not wild. Therefore, it got corrected under the effect of the art, and started to flow into his danshan where the energy should ideally be stored. There was a light sound in Shi Mu's mind after a while. It seemed that the last part of the crescent moon had finally turned into the refined spirit power. It was guided to converge in his danshan. The previously occupied location of the crystal capsule had become empty. Shi Mu opened his eyes after 12 hours. He let out a sigh, his face was beaming with excitement and joy. He didn't know anything about the strange change had taken place in his mind. However, he was ecstatic as he realized that he had reached the first stage of the art of accumulating spirit power. Moreover, a huge amount of spirit power had got stored in his danshan. It was surprising. He discovered that his eyesight and ability to concentrate had also been enhanced along with his spirit power. Moreover, there was an inexpressible feeling of clarity and comfort in his mind. What's the matter? Why did the white crystal capsule disappear? Initially, he was very excited. However, he knitted his eyebrows and started to ponder as he remembered something. Then, he started to practice the art of accumulating spirit power once again. A forced smile stretched across his face after a while. He realized that his mind didn't have the crystal capsule anymore, it had been transformed into the white crescent moon. So now, he could absorb the spiritual energy from the surroundings. But, it could be done only through the fixed process described by the art of accumulating spirit power. Moreover, the accumulation speed of spirit power had become extremely slow. So, the crystal capsule is from the moon swallowing art. Shi Mu's eyes flickered as he realized this. As per his understanding, this moon swallowing art was an auxiliary method to practice magic arts. However, he couldn't resolve this matter completely. A moonlit night arrived after a few days. Shi Mu had been waiting for it. Shi Mu followed his familiar path to the open area in the valley. Then, he examined his surroundings carefully. After that, he took his usual posture, and entered into his dreamland. He was again incarnated as a white ape on the silver boulder atop the towering cliff. The white ape started to look at the bright moon in the sky. Suddenly, numerous white light dots gathered in the sky, and streamed towards the ape's golden pupils. It seemed as if they were drawn by a mysterious gravitational force. An inexplicable sense of cool and comfort surged up, and enlivened Shi Mu's spirits. It was followed by the milky white vortex of energy swirling inside his mind. Shi Mu had anticipated this phenomenon since he had witnessed it several times. However, he was concerned about was the wondrous use of the moon swallowing art. This art could lead him to his success. Suddenly, his complexion changed. He discovered that the white vortex seemed to be larger in size, and was in the shape of a full circle. How could it be so big? He discovered that the speed of moonlight essence flowing into his eyes as a stream of energy had also increased. He hadn't noticed it as it wasn't too obvious. He woke up and realized that the sky was as dark as it was when he had entered the dreamland. However, dawn seemed to be approaching. Shi Mu focused his mind, and checked the spirit power stored within his body. He was rendered speechless. The spirit power that he had accumulated through the practice of the art was no longer there. Surprisingly, he hadn't noticed his spirit power getting consumed up. Shi Mu was still sitting cross-legged on the grass in the open area. He couldn't help, and got submerged in deep thought. Shi Mu visited the Hall of Wealth twice in the following month. He undertook some tasks to earn money to buy more pills. He usually spent his daytime in practicing the art of breeding heavenly elephants and the Gale Force blade art. Moreover, he entered his dreamland to practice the moon-swallowing art on moonlit nights. His painstaking training and iron-coated willpower had surpassed that of an ordinary person's. Shi Mu succeeded in accumulating a crystal capsule in his mind after a month of assiduous training and perseverance. Surprisingly, this crystal capsule was bigger than the previous one. The capsule once again transformed into the increased spirit power as Shi Mu practiced the art of accumulating spirit power. Therefore, the spirit power in Shi Mu's danshan increased sharply. Now, he wasn't far from breaking through the second stage of the art. The practice speed of the art of accumulating spirit power had increased since he had been gifted with an auxiliary art like the moon-swallowing art. This made him feel ecstatic and restless at the same time. This practice speed was alarming, so, there may be something dangerous lurking around. Shi Mu spent the entire day being stuck to his bed. He continued to practice the art of accumulating spirit power. However, he couldn't find any loophole in the art. This agitated him even more. He stood up from his bed, and grabbed the blade lying beside his bed. Then, he started to practice the 13 series of Gale Force blade art from the first stage. His mind began to calm down as he indulged himself in the world of the blade. He could see a succession of light rolling from the blade. It looked like a lotus flower in full bloom. The sword light filled the entire room. However, it didn't bump into anything even though the room was small. The movements of his blade became fast with the passage of time, their accuracy increased at the same time. Shi Mu was surprised. Now, he could perform every minor detail of the art with great accuracy due to his increased sensing ability. He hadn't been able to achieve this before. This achievement triggered the speed of his blade. Ha! He sucked in a mouthful of air. Then, he flicked his wrist, and shot a dazzling blade light up into the air. The blade light produced a glaring shield of blade shadows. It was similar to a layer of light shield which spread and covered the entire space. It was like a fish trap that had blocked every escape route. Now, he had achieved 12 cuts in one breath. Shi Mu felt ecstatic as he realized that he had ascended a layer of his 13 series of Gale Force blade art. Now, he was just one level behind from achieving the consummate stage of this technique. Shi Mu felt that he was sweating profusely. So, he put his blade down. However, he didn't feel even a trace of fatigue. He stretched his body to relax his muscles. He went to bed once his real qi and blood had returned to their normal state. Then, he got occupied with his thoughts. Shi Mu wanted to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants. However, his blood-strengthening pills and bone-tempering pills had been used up once again. Therefore, he couldn't proceed any further. Moreover, he didn't have any money left with him. So, he considered going to the Hall of Wealth to take up a task in order to earn some money. However, the tasks meant for ordinary warrior were too time-consuming and laborious in nature. On top of that, the reward that they offered wasn't high. Therefore, Shi Mu was reluctant to go to the Hall of Wealth and take up any task. However, he was a genuine magician practitioner. He had practiced till the second stage of the art of accumulating spirit power. So, he could enhance his skill set by picking up an art of a formula adept. He could obtain it from the general library in exchange for the flaming demon tokens. Shi Mu hoped that the flaming demon tokens in his possession to be sufficient to obtain a suitable formula adept book. He had planned to pick up a Hotian martial art from the general library with the 6 flaming demon tokens that would remain with him after he had selected his formula adept technique. This was because a Hotian martial art would enhance his strength. This would be beneficial for him in the future. He analyzed the situation, and made up his mind. Then, he set out towards the general library with his flaming demon tokens. Chapter 77, The Sex Seasonal Matches Begin. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. He's here again. He's here again. The huge parrot inside the golden cage on the second floor of the general library fluttered its wings in excitement as he saw Shi Mu coming up the stairs. Then, he started to chatter loudly. The mountain-like man was seated behind the table. He got angry as he heard the loud sounds of the parrot. Then, he started to poke the parrot's head with a wooden stalk. The parrot started to issue a strange and painful screech as it begged for mercy. "Oh, it's you. You haven't showed up since ages. So, what brought you here today? Could it be that you were unable to obtain flaming demon tokens?" The fat man stopped poking the parrot, and turned his head. He was surprised to see Shi Mu. "Master Ju, this humble disciple went through an appraisal process a few months back. Now, this disciple has become a registered magician practitioner. So, I've come here to look for books on formula arts and martial arts techniques," Shi Mu replied respectfully. "You've become a registered magician practitioner?" The fat man was taken aback as he heard Shi Mu's words. he sized Shi Mu up from top to bottom. He seemed to be startled by this news. So, what kind of an element has been detected? He scratched his head as he asked. Shi Mu didn't conceal anything, he narrated in detail his experience in the Hall of Magic. Spatial attribute? So, do you intend to learn the formula arts? The fat man knocked the table with his right index finger and straightened his back as he heard the narration. Then, he asked in a serious tone. Yes, this child doesn't have many choices, Shi Mu replied in a dejected manner. If that's the case, then I would suggest you to refrain from picking a martial arts technique for now. Senior, may I ask why? Shi Mu was startled. Don't panic. I suggest that you also choose a charm magic art apart from a formula art. Do you know that formula magic and charm magic are complementary to each other, and can be mutually combined to reinforce your skill? These two arts have many skills in common. And, they can enhance one's abilities if practiced together. In fact, charm magic is a branch of formula magic. So, it would be easier to learn both of them at the same time. The fat man twitched his mouth and explained. So, it means that I can learn the charm and formula magic arts together. Shi Mu was astonished as he heard Master Ju's words. He had always considered the paper charm to be a mysterious magical power. Therefore, he was pleasantly surprised. I'm a spirit magician. So, I only have a little understanding of the spatial attribute. But, I've been working in the general library for several years. So, I've given you an appropriate advice. The fat man didn't pay attention to Shi Mu's curiosity. A hint of arrogance flashed across his face as he spoke these words. Thanks a lot, Master Ju. This child will consider this matter carefully. Shi Mu quickly resumed his calmness. Then, he bowed to Master Ju. On you go. The fat man nodded and waved his plump hand. Then, Shi Mu left. Shi Mu spent some time to explore the row of shelves containing the magic arts. He picked up 2 secret records after a quarter of an hour. Then, he resolutely appeared before the fat man. One of the records contained methods to make charms, it was named the Sacred Book of Magical Charms. The other record was an elementary book on formulas, it was named Comprehensive Introduction to Formula Arts. The fat man didn't say anything. He took the records and 12 flaming demon tokens from Shi Mu. Then, he pulled out 2 jade slips, and started to copy the contents on them. Shi Mu received the jade slips, and put them into his bosom. Then, he bowed to Master Ju, and extended his sincere gratitude towards him. He left the general library in high spirits. He wanted to go back to his room so he could start reading the slips. However, he came across something unusual on his way back home. Shi Mu was surprised as he heard a faint commotion in the valley. Then, he saw a few primary disciples hurriedly heading out of the valley. They looked extremely enthusiastic. They seemed to be discussing something in a low voice. Several primary disciples were carrying swords and other weapons. Their faces were blazing with eagerness for a challenge. Shi Mu's brows wrinkled. Then, a bitter smile spread across his face. He wasn't aware of the situation in the valley since he had been busy with his closed-door practice for the last month. But, it seemed to him that something very important was about to take place. Brother Shi. Shi Mu was about to ask someone when he heard a familiar voice. Then, a sturdy youngster strode over. He was none other than Huo Mao. He was dressed in a black uniform. 2 double-edged axes were hung over his shoulder. The heavy axes seemed to be adding to his big stature. Brother Huo. Shi Mu's face beamed with happiness as he saw a familiar face. Then, he moved forward to greet him. Haha, it's rare to see you wandering outside. What's the matter? Brother Shi has been going through such a painstaking training. So, is he interested in displaying his strength in the upcoming competition? Huo Mao said with a smile. Competition? Shi Mu wrinkled his eyebrows as he understood the reason behind the commotion. It had been mentioned in the primary disciples' handbook that matches would be conducted every 3 months. Shi Mu realized that it had been 3 months since he had entered the sect. However, he had forgotten about this matter since he had completely immersed himself in his training. Don't tell me that you had forgotten about the competition. Huo Mao couldn't help but laugh as he saw Shi Mu's expressions. Shi Mu faced Huo Mao, and clasped his hands across his chest. He then said, I see that I made brother Huo laugh. But I've been truly careless, to be honest. Huo Mao didn't mean to ridicule him. He laughed as he said, that's normal. In fact, this explains that you were practicing very earnestly. Moreover, I've heard from Bai Shi that your fist strength is mind-blowing, and that you excel in the blade art as well. And, you must have cultivated your real qi by now. So, your strength should have progressed magnificently. You can achieve a remarkable position in this competition with your strength. After all, these matches pay high rewards, even though they are small in scale. Shi Mu's complexion changed as he heard this. He then nodded. Shi Mu strained his mind, and remembered the details about the competition and rewards written in the handbook. It was indeed a great bonus for primary disciples like him. You can come with me to the match venue. Bai Shi and the other disciples are already headed there. Brother Bai's strength has greatly progressed since he had joined the Holy Spirit Association. I think that he's going to exhibit a splendid performance in this match, Huo Mao said in a subtle tone. Can brother Huo wait a moment for me? I'll be back with my weapons, Shi Mu said after pondering for a while. He, sure, brother Shi. Take your time, Huo Mao replied with a smile. Shi Mu nodded and started to walk towards his room. A hint of a strange look flashed in Huo Mao's eyes as he saw his receding figure. Suddenly, a person's shadow appeared and stood beside Huo Mao. It was the golden-haired youth Jin Huan of the Holy Spirit Association. Brother Jin, Huo Mao greeted him respectfully. I see, you've done a great job. I've known Shi Mu to be a loner, he barely exchanges words with anyone. But, I can see that he's very comfortable around you, Jin Huan said in a light tone as he looked at Shi Mu's receding figure. Chapter 78, Rules. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Brother Jin, why are you so interested in Shi Mu? He's very strong, but I don't think that he's worthy of so much of your attention, right? Huo Mao asked in a flattering tone. You don't know anything. He looks like an ordinary person, but I know that he had secretly participated in the talent test of the Hall of Magic a month ago. He passed the test, and he's an official magician practitioner now. And, it's been reported that his talent is extraordinary, Jin Huan's eyes flashed as he spoke. Magic skills. Huo Mao was taken aback. The word about this matter hasn't spread yet, other groups don't know about it. So, we the Holy Spirit Association should take advantage of this opportunity, we should try to find a way to pull this person into our group, Jin Huan spoke in a whispering tone. Huo Mao nodded in agreement as he understood Jin Huan's plan. Fortunately, Shi Mu is familiar with only a few people in our sect. Interestingly, all these people are connected to us. It's great that you are on good terms with him. But, we have to make sure that no other group can take him even if we fail to draw him into our group, Jin Huan devised after a thought. Yes. I request Brother Jin to feel relieved, and leave the rest to me, Huo Mao nodded as he replied. Jin Huan gave a nod, and exchanged a few more words with Huo Mao. Then, he departed. Huo Mao felt relieved as he gazed at Jin Huan's receding figure. Then, he noticed Shi Mu emerge from the valley. He held a steel blade in his hand, casually so. Huo Mao forced a smile on his face, and strode forward to meet him. Huo Mao and Shi Mu arrived at the valley between the 11th and 12th mountain peaks. A circular plaza with an area of 30,000 square meters was situated in the midst of the valley's trees. 10 rings had been arranged in the plaza. The plaza was crowded with more than 1,000 disciples. The black-attired disciples were gathered around the 10 rings. The loud noise of their chatter resounded endlessly. Shi Mu possessed incredible eyesight. So, he could see the competing disciples in the 10 rings even before entering the place. He could also see the disciple who stood on the side of each of the rings. These disciples wore the uniform of the Black Demon sect. The word junior was embroidered on the cuff of one of their sleeves. These junior disciples seemed to be the referees of the matches. The sound of the cheering of the surrounding people was bursting out of the plaza. The atmosphere had become extremely fervent. This enthusiastic atmosphere didn't leave Shi Mu unaffected. He became eager to take part in the competition, and decided to put his strength to test. This small competition is organized every 3 months for the primary disciples. Disciples of higher ranks don't participate in these matches. The main goal of this competition is to determine the ranking of the primary disciples. It can be considered to be a warm-up before the annual competition. Huo Mao stretched his finger, and pointed at a figure as he spoke. Shi Mu's eyes followed the direction of Huo Mao's finger. He saw a several feet high gigantic black stone monument that towered on the other side of the plaza. The entire surface of the monument was covered with small silver characters. Shi Mu focused his spirit power in his eyes. And, he could clearly read the silver characters written on the monument, even though they were hundreds of meters away. These words were the name of the participants. Shi Mu became curious when he saw this. He thought that it was the first time that he had seen the ranks for the primary disciples. The names of the participants twinkled with a silvery light. The topmost name was Duan Qianli. It was followed by several people's names. Can Brother Shi read the names on the monument from here? Huo Mao asked. He was astonished since he saw Shi Mu looking eagerly at the stone monument. My eyesight has always been better than ordinary people. So, I can read the names on the monument vaguely. But, they would appear clearer once I get a little closer to the monument, Shi Mu chuckled as he explained. They chatted as they entered the plaza. Huo Mao pushed through the crowd as he led the way. Then, they finally arrived at the stone monument. Hundreds of disciples had already gathered around the monument. Most of them were primary disciples who had entered the sect with Shi Mu. Shi Mu raised his eyebrows as he noticed Lan Feng. She was surrounded by several disciples. And, she looked extremely confident. She seemed to have made good progress in the Blood Dragon gang. She had become a popular and influential figure among the new disciples. The surrounding people looked at her every now and then as they discussed about her in whispers. Shi Mu glanced at her, and then turned his eyes towards the stone monument. Does Brother Huo know the person named Duan Qianli, whose name has been written at the top of the monument? Shi Mu narrowed his eyes as he looked at the topmost name on the stone monument. Brother Duan? He's a mysterious guy. He seldom makes a public appearance. I haven't seen him many times, but I heard that he had made his breakthrough to the Houtian middle stage in the last annual competition. It's reported that he is a wind element magician practitioner, Huo Mao replied after a thought. He cultivates both the magic and martial arts at the same time. Shi Mu felt a chill in his heart. He had never thought that his situation would be similar to a guy who holds the first rank among the primary disciples. It seemed that one's strength could significantly increase, if one's martial arts techniques and magic arts were synchronized in an appropriate way. Our sect arranges a Xian Tian level expert and a few junior disciples to organize and judge these matches. But, it seems that the Xian Tian master hasn't yet arrived. Huo Mao looked at the platform near the stone monument, and noticed an empty purple wooden seat. Brother Huo, I've entered this sect very recently. So, I'm not familiar with the rules of these matches. Can you please enlighten me? Shi Mu pondered for a moment, and asked. He. Certainly. You know that there are a large number of primary disciples in our sect. Now, the old primary disciples have come to know each other pretty well during the previous year. So, they don't challenge each other unless they are confident. So, the rules of the competition are simple. The first day of the competition is reserved for the new primary disciples. They are to challenge each other. The next day involves the new primary disciples challenging the old primary disciples. The third day is fixed for challenges among the old primary disciples. There's no limitation on the number of arts and weapons that one can use in this competition. But, there shouldn't be a threat to the life of one's opponent. So, the strongest person wins. Huo Mao explained the rules of the competition in detail. Ah, so, that's how it is, Shi Mu nodded. It's nothing. Brother Shi, you don't have to be so formal. Well, as per my understanding, our sect has enrolled 4 groups of new disciples this year, your group is one of them. So, there should be around 300 to 400 primary disciples. Today is the first day of the competition. So, I might get to see you in the ring, Huo Mao beckoned with his hand and said as a thought crossed his mind. Suddenly, Shi Mu's eyes fell on the bottom of the stone monument. He saw several hundred names written in red color, they had been separated from the silver names. He noticed that his name was among the last 100 names, these names seemed to belong to the new disciples. Brother Shi, those who defeat the old disciples in the second day's matches would be upgraded in rank, and gain a handsome reward. But, I suggest that you don't think of challenging the old disciples. Everyone knows that the new disciples don't have any chance of a victory against them. Anyways, I've heard that Brother Shi is extremely strong. But, you must remain cautious throughout the fight. If you wish to gain any advantage out of these matches, focus on defeating your own peers to hit a good rank. You must know that our sect rewards the top 10 new primary disciples, Huo Mao said. Thanks for the advice, Brother Huo. Shi Mu nodded with clasped hands as he pondered over Huo Mao's words. Haha! Brother Shi, you don't need to be polite. Just consider my words as wise remarks, Huo Mao laughed. Chapter 79, Observing the Matches. Translator. Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Shi Mu consulted about a few more matters related to the competition. Then, he bid his farewell to Huo Mao. After that, he turned around and advanced towards the rings. Huo Mao sighed as he watched Shi Mu's figure recede. Then, he turned around and left as well. The competition in the 10 rings grew more intense with the passage of time. The new disciples had been exempted for 1 year from the challenges of others. Moreover, they were free to abstain from participating in this quarterly competition. But, most of them wanted to try their skills in these matches. After all, a newborn calf has no fear of the tiger. In addition, the new disciples had made tremendous progress after joining the sect. So, they were eager to display their strength. Shi Mu was cautious. He decided that he won't make a rash challenge. So, he wandered around the rings, and observed the fights. The fact was that Shi Mu only knew the disciples who had entered the sect with him. However, he knew nothing about the rest of the 300 to 400 disciples. Shi Mu noticed a tall and sturdy young man fighting with a green-haired youth in the 5th ring. Both youngsters held long swords, they seemed to be Houtian primary stage warriors. The tall youth's sword art was simple yet fierce. His sword set off a strong sword wind as he poured his real qi into it. The wind produced by his sword started to spread chill in the air, it was even felt by the people who stood dozens of meters away from the ring. However, the youth with green hair didn't seem to be affected by this attack, his body swayed in the air like a willow leaf. He conveniently dodged the attacks made by the opponent's swift and fierce sword. Then, he waved his sword to launch his counterattack. His sword art seemed strange, his counterattack was a simple thrust at his opponent. However, its speed was extremely fast. A black trace of shadows would appear in the air every time he attacked. The tall youth was thrown into confusion as he tried to hold against the fast strikes of the opponent's sword. The bilateral situation changed after a while. The green-haired youth strolled around the ring as he gracefully thrust his sword at his opponent. However, the tall youth seemed to be gasping for breath due to the excessive use of his real qi. His exhaustion seemed to have affected his sword's movement, which had become slow and sluggish. Suddenly, the green-haired youth's eyes sparked as he waved his sword. Then, his body shot forward towards his opponent like an arrow leaving the bowstring. Then, he swooped down on his prey with his sharp sword. A trace of a faint golden light shrouded the edge of his sword. Then, it exploded into a dozen of golden sword shadows. Bang! A loud sound resounded. The tall youth couldn't resist this attack even though he responded fast and swung his sword. His efforts went in vain, and a massive invisible force lifted him off the ground. His back bumped against the ground as he was thrown out of the ring, upside down. The tall youth struggled, but couldn't get up. Blood started to gush out of his wounds. It wasn't clear how many times he had been stabbed, he was badly injured. His wounds didn't seem to be life-threatening. However, his condition would render him bedridden for at least half a month. Then, a few black-robed janitor disciples rushed out from the crowd, and took him away for treatment. Meanwhile, the junior disciple, the ring referee, announced the green-haired youth as the winner of the match. The surrounding disciples burst into a roar. Then, they started to discuss the sword art that the green-haired youth had displayed. However, Shi-Mu stood silently and focused his eyes on the green-haired youth. The green-haired youth stepped down from the ring. His eyes sparkled as he turned around and left. A young man and a girl were fighting in the seventh ring, both were empty-handed. The young man seemed to have practiced a mysterious martial arts, his hands were wrapped in a layer of bright white light. From afar, the youth's hands seemed to be made up of precious jade. He clasped his hands to make a palm knife, and fluttered it up and down. This quick movement raised a strong gust of wind which dashed toward the girl. The girl wasn't dressed in the sex uniform, she wore tight-fitted blue-colored clothing. She seemed small and fragile under the fierce attack of her opponent's fists. However, she was displaying an extremely fierce art, it was called the Fist of the Heavenly Eagle. She curled up her fingers in the shape of a hook as she took the youth's fists. Suddenly, a series of dull thumping sound reverberated. Their fight grew more and more intense with each passing moment. However, the two of them seemed to have reached a stalemate as they collided and staggered back a few steps, they seemed to be extremely exhausted. A murderous look flashed in the youth's eyes as he stomped his foot on the ground. This halted the backward motion of his body. Then, he shot forward like a bullet, and clasped his jade-like palms together. Then, he threw a fist in the direction of the blue-attired girl, his fist appeared like a white jade hammer. A pair of arms with bulging muscles was revealed as the youth's sleeves burst open with the force of the movement. The girl narrowed her eyes and let out a loud shout as she felt the heavy palm wind against her face. Her hands curled up at the same time, and emitted a faint red light. Then, the red light condensed and left behind 10 dark red fingers as sharp as thorns. An ear-piercing sound was heard as she waved her hands. Her hands moved forward like a flood dragon rushing out of its lair to deal with the youth's attack, and were followed by after-images. The two figures twisted together, and were thrown back by the fierce collision. The youth's complexion turned pale as he staggered a few steps backwards. 5 blood-dripping holes had appeared on his shoulders, his arms looked soft and droopy. It seemed that he couldn't make a move anymore. The girl's complexion also looked pale, she was breathing heavily. However, she didn't seem to be hurt. The outcome of this match was pretty obvious. The corners of Shi-Mu's eyes twitched as he saw this. He couldn't help but look at the girl. He started to think about the approach to deal with her attacks. 2 people were involved in an intense fight in the first ring. One of them held a long sword in his hand, the other was bare-handed. Both were moving at an incredibly fast speed. They were wielding their sword and palm by drawing support from their real chi. The sword and palm were occasionally setting off strong winds that were making the air swirl around them. The surrounding people were watching this duel with utmost concentration. A few tongue-clicking sounds could be heard every now and then in admiration. Shi-Mu was watching the match carefully as well. Suddenly, he shook his head and turned around to leave. The 2 youngsters seemed to be fighting intensely on the ring. However, their match seemed more like a show. Both looked extremely flashy. Moreover, their fast speed was hampering their potential, it was making their striking power insufficient. So, the outcome of the match couldn't be determined for a long time as none of them seemed to be striking to defeat his opponent. Shi Mu got a general impression of the average strength of the new primary disciples after he had watched a few matches. Moreover, he had overheard people's conversation, and had noted the names of the opponents worthy of his attention. His acquaintances like Bai Shi, Xiaoming, Lan Feng and a few others had successfully streaked across several rings. They had won several matches, and had stood out among others. This had added to their popularity. Shi Mu had seen Bai Shi's match. Bai Shi had taken only a couple of seconds to crush his opponent. This proved that he had achieved significant progress since he had joined the Holy Spirit Association. Shi Mu sucked in a deep breath. Then, he looked around and concentrated on the nearby ring. A match had just ended in that ring. A junior disciple was busy in making arrangements for the next competition. Shi Mu's eyes flashed as he quickened his steps. The ranks of the new disciples continued to change on the black stone monument along with the outcome of the matches. This stone monument wasn't an ordinary stone, the names were automatically upgrading and dropping from time to time. It was a mystical sight. Nearly half of the day was over. Many strong disciples had outshone the others in this duration. Bai Shi, Ou Yangming, Lan Feng, these were a few of the many names that had climbed to the top of the new disciples' ranking. Some old disciples gathered near the black monument, and got immersed in a heated conversation. All of them were old primary disciples. Several old disciples had come to watch the new disciples' matches. After all, they were supposed to be challenged by these disciples on the next day. I've discovered a few promising guys amongst the new disciples. The best of them is a person named Bai Shi, he's really good. I watched some of his matches. He practices a fire art called the Yang Gong art. He seems to have a profound control over his art. A black-robed youth looked at the stone monument as he said. Chapter 80, Challenge. Translator, Novel_Saga Editor, Novel_Saga. Oh! Can this boy, Bai Shi, pose a threat to us? An obese youth was standing next to the black-robed youth. A faint trace of cold light flickered in his eyes as he asked with a smile. How's that possible? The black-robed youth sneered as he proudly asked. By the way, I've heard that there's a practitioner magician among this group of new disciples. Is this true? The obese youth's eyes flickered as if he thought of something. Yes, I've also heard about it. It seems to be true. There's a rumor that there's a good practitioner magician in this group of new disciples. He has a decent grasp on the fire element magic arts. He has been recruited by the Holy Spirit Association. The black-robed youth nodded as he spoke. The obese youth wrinkled his brows as he heard this, a trace of hesitation flashed through his eyes. The art that he practiced was overbearing. However, it could be repelled by a magic art. Therefore, there were chances of him getting in trouble if he were to bump into this fire element magician the next day. Wow! A brave person showed up again. The black-robed youth's vision flashed as it fell on the black stone monument. He was looking at a name that was written in red. It was quickly ascending from the bottom position to the top 30. It was the first day of the competition. According to the rules of the ring elimination system, only the new primary disciples could challenge each other. The disciples below the rank of 100 could challenge anyone of a higher rank as long as there was a gap of 50 ranks between them. The scope of challenge was reduced when someone entered the top 100 ranks. The opposition would be treated as failed if he were to get defeated or had declined to fight. Moreover, he would lose the right to challenge anyone. He would also lose the right to challenge the old disciples on the next day. The new primary disciples who had the potential to enter the top 30 were signified as the outstanding people of the group. These disciples were able to pique the interest of the old primary disciples. Shi Mu. I didn't know that there was such an outstanding new disciple, the obese youth knitted his brows, and said as he heard this name. Inside a ring. Shi Mu wielded his steel blade. Suddenly, 9 blade shadows emerged out of it, and dashed toward his opponent, who was trying to resist the shadows with a pair of swords. The complexion of the youth with the 2 swords changed as he saw this. He started to rapidly wave his swords in an attempt to make a shield in front of him. Multiple sounds could be heard as their weapons clashed. The double-sword youth couldn't resist the attack of the 9 blade shadows. He was forced back a few steps. Moreover, his arms were struck by the force of the blades, they went numb. They started to ache, so much so that he couldn't hold the sword's hilt. Shi Mu didn't wait for the youth to recover. His figure flashed and appeared before his opponent. Shi Mu punched the youth in his chest before the youngster could understand anything. The youth had noticed Shi Mu's movement. However, he couldn't dodge the punch as his reaction had been too slow owing to the pain and numbness in his arms. Bang! A loud sound was heard. Shi Mu had hit the youth with extreme force. Therefore, the youth's body was lifted off the ground, and was thrown out of the ring, upside down. He bumped against the ground, and rolled in pain. Then, he spouted a mouthful of blood, and lost his consciousness. The winner is Shi Mu. The bearded junior disciple, the referee of the ring, was dumbfounded as he saw this. He gaped at Shi Mu for a while. Then, he raised his voice and announced the result. Shi Mu slipped the steel blade into the sheath with an expressionless face. He was at the first stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. However, he had combined his extraordinary inborn strength with his real chi, and his advanced wind-blowing blade art and stone-breaking fist. Therefore, he had enough strength to defeat the majority of his peers. In addition, Shi Mu had chosen the opponents who possessed good speed. However, his opponents couldn't take an advantage because of his powerful eyesight. Shi Mu turned his head, and looked at the stone monument. The name of the disciple that he had defeated was Su Mu Bai. Su Mu Bai was a new disciple like Shi Mu. However, he was known to be one of the most powerful disciples among the new group. He was ranked 17. However, his position was replaced by Shi Mu after this match. The surrounding disciples were astonished as they saw this. The entire plaza was filled with tumultuous uproar. Shi Mu's victory had caused a huge uproar as he had never been in the limelight except for the first day when he had fought with Chu Kun. He had been busy with closed-door practice since the last 3 months. So, even the new primary disciples had almost forgotten him. Therefore, everyone was shocked when he showed up with his supernatural strength, and entered the top 20 ranks. It seems like this boy Shi Mu has never revealed his true strength in public. Otherwise, the other new disciples wouldn't have been so surprised. Some old disciples had been watching Shi Mu's match from a distance. One of them spoke since they found Shi Mu's face to be unfamiliar. Every time we hold these competitions, a couple of such guys emerge out of nowhere with their remarkable talent. But, this person's strength isn't at an ordinary level. His blade art seems to be a martial disciple level martial arts, but he has reached a high level in this art. Moreover, I think that he has got something else up his sleeve. Another old disciple said with a trace of curiosity in his eyes. Meanwhile, Shi Mu walked down the ring and advanced towards another. An extremely exhausted and wounded person was thrown off the 5th ring. He looked miserable, his shirt was tattered, and his face was tainted by blood. A thin and tall youth was standing in the ring with calm expression. It seemed as if he hadn't been affected by the match. He held a long black whip in his hand. Suddenly, he flickered his wrist. Then, the whip retracted and wrapped itself around his waist. Shi Mu's eyes flashed as he observed the movements of the thin youth. It seemed from the way that he used the long whip that he was good with soft weapons. He was one of the emerging figures among the new disciples. His name was Ruanji. He was ranked 9th among the new disciples. He had defeated 7 or 8 challengers with only 5 strokes. Shi Mu's eyes flickered as he advanced towards the ring without any hesitation. My name is Shi Mu. I would like to challenge your excellency, Shi Mu challenged him in a low voice. The audience broke into an uproar as they saw this. Shi Mu had occupied 17th rank in the competition by now. Therefore, he had attracted the attention of several people. The audience was excited as they were about to witness a match between two high-ranked disciples. The referee of this ring was a junior disciple with sunken cheeks. Traces of a cold expression emerged in his eyes as he saw Shi Mu challenge Ruan Zi. "Well, I'd like to see if your blade art is fiercer than my whip." Ruan Zi seemed to be aware of Shi Mu's strength. He sized Shi Mu up from head to toe. Then, he spoke in a dignified tone. After that, he narrowed his eyes, and started to focus his vision. Competition begins. Shi Mu shot towards Ruan Zi as soon as he heard the referee's voice. His steel blade flashed and exuded 9 blade shadows towards his opponent. Ruan Zi's eyes revealed a trace of fear as he saw this. He hadn't expected that Shi Mu's actions would be so quick. However, he wasn't inexperienced either. Suddenly, he pushed his real chi into the whip with a low shout. The whip made a beautiful arc in the air, and transformed into 9 whip shadows. His 9 whip shadows blocked the 9 blade shadows in midair. The sudden clash set off an explosion in the air, and airwaves were sent rippling in all directions. A sharp whiz sound was heard. His long whip whizzed out like a poisonous viper leaving its hole. It penetrated through the air with an unstoppable momentum, and dashed toward Shi Mu's chest like a long pole.